name is Viktor. I work as a software engineer at a company called OAuth. The company is providing services to developers all around the world. In this map, you'll see green and blue dots. Green dots are points and locations in the world where we have developer communities organizing events, meetups, get-together groups around Vaadin. And the blue dots here on the map are the locations where Vaadin has development offices. So this dot up there in Finland is where I've been working the last around 3 years. And overall, the company has around 150 employees in all the 4 offices displayed here. What does the company do? Well, we help developers build web applications that users love. So it's a company that builds products and open source products targeting developers. For instance, it's quite interesting that over the last 3 years, most of the time there, I've been working on open source. So I've been paid to work on open source, which is amazing, I think. And the result of that work is a design system, set of UI components that you can find. That's one of the products. Most of them are free, some of them are commercial. That's what the company does. Then on top of that, there is a web framework for Java developers that help build applications using those UI components or some other components. And if you're a Java developer, Java on the back end, then you might find this interesting. That's what the company does as well. And then there are starter packs, like an application template that if you're starting a new project, you might as well just pick one of the existing templates and go from there. From that background, it might be quite obvious that I know something about JavaScript and I know something about Java, because that's what the company is operating with. But in this talk here, topic is OAuth for humans. And so if you're a human, if you consider yourself a human, then you might as well just stay on and listen further to this meetup talk. And if you identify yourself more as a robot, then there is an RFC for you to read. Please go ahead. You probably will find much more details there in the RFC rather than listening to the talk here. But for everybody who decides to stay, we'll see in details why. But before we go into the specifics and details about OAuth, let's do a little hands up. If the term OAuth is at all familiar to you, have you heard OAuth? Like, raise your hands if you heard OAuth. And now please keep the hand up if you think you know something about how it works internally. So we have like a handful of people who know something, and for the rest of you, you actually have a chance to learn something from this meetup. For you who can keep the hands up, sorry. Maybe you can ask some questions and figure out things that are not covered. Okay, for what is OAuth? And what are the situations where it can be useful or helpful? Imagine this situation. You are on the web and you find an amazing website, OAuth.io. It's an online service which lets you draw diagrams, just like the one I showed in the previous slide. And it's online, it's free to use, it's nice, it gets the job done. However, the problem is, if you want to save something that you've drawn, the only option is that you have to download it to your computer, or, okay, it also can save that diagram into your cloud storage, be it OneDrive or Dropbox or something from Google and so on. But then it's okay for me, but how do I let this website, draw.io, to access my data at Microsoft Drive and save the files there for me? And well, this problem is not new. It's been around for a while, and there are a number of solutions there. This one, which I think is the most ugly one, is if I just give my full credentials, my username and password from Microsoft, to this third-party application. And I think that's probably not a good solution. It's ugly because basically if I do that, the third-party application will have absolutely full access to my Microsoft Drive and can do whatever I can do there, including deleting files, sharing them with other parties, and so on. It's not what I want to do normally. However, this is what is still being used. This screenshot, which you can see now, is taken quite recently, and if you, for instance, want to migrate email from one provider to another, that's exactly what we ask you to do, to enter your username and password. And you surely have to trust that they will only do what they claim they will, which is move the email, and not send any other email, not delete your email, and so on. So, solutions are there, but they're not good. Basically, every other big company have also invented a solution of their own, some sort of authentication platform or API or service. And it's all much better than giving credentials, but still, then if you're a product IO in this situation, this world, you'll have to implement your integration with Google, Facebook, Yahoo, or Flickr, so on, whichever you want to support, you'll have to build them separately. And that's not ideal. And that's why around 12 years ago, big companies, few people from Twitter, few people from Google, and a number of others, they came together and they defined a standard. Okay, let's build a standard way to authorize the authorization to applications on the web. The name of the standard is OAuth, and then a few years later they revised, they made a version 2 of the standard. So it's now about 10 or 8 years OAuth 2, and this is the one we're going to look into details here in this talk. It's going to be around how it's working, what are the terms, what are the flows, and what are the possible drawbacks or pitfalls to avoid there if you're going to use it. Let's start with the terms, because this is a standard. It defines a set of terms, which, if you ask me, are not super intuitive. At least it took me a while when we were working and writing with trying to integrate an authentication flow based on OAuth into one of our products. It's been challenging to figure out what is what. So let's start with the fact that users, they're not called users, they're called resource owners, which makes sense if you think about it long enough, but it's not initial enough for me. So users, resource owners. Clients, in terms of the standard terms, are, for instance, the web application is a client. It's basically any application that you want to give access to your data somewhere else, it's a client. Then there is an authorization server, and in this example that we're going to look into details, Microsoft account would be the authorization server. It's a server that can verify that the client is should indeed have the access and authorize. Let's look into details what authorize means later. And then finally, there is a resource server. That's the place where the resources, the data files that you want to access, the place where they are located. And they all can be separate entities. Some of them might be combined, but in terms of the standard, those are different roles. In our example, user would be me, the client would be OAuth, third-party application, and the authorization server would be Microsoft account, the one that holds access to Microsoft OneDrive, which would be the resource server. Now, there is a bunch of other terms as well there, defined by the standard, starting with access token, which I haven't found a good picture to represent that because it's basically a random looking string of characters, which a client is supposed to include in every request they make to the resource server, so that resource server knows they can really give out of the data for the resource. So access token. And there is an authorization grant, which is kind of an abstract term. Basically, it's anything that can be given to authorization server, so that in exchange it gives you, or the client, an access token. And for instance, authorization grant could be credentials. Username and password is something that you can get an access token in exchange for. There is a refresh token, is another alternative what can grant a client an access token. So it's also a randomly looking string of characters that can be sent to authorization server, so that in response they would would give an access token that would be given to resource server. Complicated. Those are the terms. Then the standard goes on and looks into all kinds of clients that might exist and divides them with respect to whether or not they are public or confidential. And in this example, Drawdock.io would be a public client because it is not related in any way to Microsoft. And so it is a third party. In that sense, it is public. And then confidential clients are, for instance, a mobile application, a mobile client for OneDrive would be a confidential client because Microsoft probably has full access to that client application. And then clients are also divided on the other criteria, which is, are they running in the browser, are they running on the server, or are they running as a mobile app? There might as well be maybe some other types of clients, but those are the ones the standard talks about. And Product.io is a web application, and it also has a backend, so it is a browser-based client. Then there are flows, or at this point I should say that, yes, I mentioned that OAuth is a standard. It defines how to go about authorization and authentication on the web, and mostly it is aimed at authorization, so it's giving access. But the truth is, it doesn't define a single way to do things. It actually defines a number of flows, and it leaves a lot of space for the implementations to decide or make choices on how to implement things while still staying in scope of the standard. So it's more of a framework that allows many standards. That's why we have several flows, and also I think that's why it's not so obvious if you try to understand how it works, because you'll figure, sometimes you'll come across one flow and sometimes you come across another flow, and it makes things complicated. In this example that I'm going through here, we'll look into authorization code flow, which means that the grant to get access token from the authorization server is an authorization code, whatever that means. Let's look into how it works. Authorization code flow. So once again, the situation is I am using Product.io web application, and I want to, and I've drawn a diagram and I want to save it to my Microsoft OneDrive. And I don't want to give my Microsoft username and password to Product.io because I don't trust them. I don't want to give them full access to my OneDrive account. What happens at this point is the client, Product.io, tells me that they actually want to get my authorization to access. And the client itself, they define how that prompt looks. In this case, they've shown me a pop-up with a button. So I click at the authorize button. What happens next is then the client would send me to the authorization server. And now we probably don't see that, but in the address bar, in the URL of this new pop-up window, it doesn't say Product.io anymore. It says login.microsoft.com, which is now I'm in the realm of Microsoft, and at this point it would be okay for me to give my Microsoft credentials there because I'm giving them to Microsoft. That's okay. So Microsoft authorization server, in this case, they will try to first identify who I am, what they ask me, and at this point, OAuth tells nothing about how authorization server should do that. They might choose to do two-factor, username and password, anything else. In this case, they are asking for my email address. And once I've given that, let's look at the URL there. I will surely give the access there, but what happens next is defined by this URL. It's basically the URL that the client, Product.io, used to send me to the authorization server. It includes here in the URL details and get parameters the client ID, which identifies Product.io, which implies that Product.io developers had to, prior to that whole thing happening, go to Microsoft and register themselves as OAuth client, so they get this client ID back, and now they include it in every response they send to Microsoft. Next is the response type. That's the kind of response they expect from Microsoft Authorization Server in that case, and it says code, which corresponds to authorization code grant. And then they also include the redirect URL. So this is the URL they want Microsoft to send me back if I am given my concern to Product.io to access my data. And then the scope defines what kind of access rights they are asking for. In that case, they want to read user details, read and write all files, and they also want to have the offline access. A little bit too much if you ask me, but that's what they ask. Now, based on all that information, Microsoft would decide how to ask or display that information to me in a more human-readable way. First, they will ask who I am, so I enter my username there, then they decide, okay, it's enough if I'm given my password, which I do, And now they use the information from the URL to describe what kind of request is that. They show draw-the-layer icon, which they can find out by looking at the client's ID in the URL. They also show here the list of permissions this client is asking for. They list it based on the URL parameters. Read your profile, have full access, and so on. And so I am supposed to read all that as a user and give my consent. Or if you say no, that's another option. If I think this is too much or it was clicked by mistake. But if I say yes, which I do in this example, what happens next is that authorization server would use the redirect URL from the original request and give an authorization code, a single use code that would be transferred to the client. This is how it looks. So they use the redirect URL, which the client provided in the first place, and they also give the code, including the get parameter. Now, this code is something that the client would use to go up again to the authorization server and then get the access token back in response. That happens behind the scenes, so I have no way to see that happening apart from looking at the result. But I assume this the request that Dropback backend does to Microsoft looks something like that. It's a post request to a well-known URL that the client developers need to know. It includes all the details of the client, so including the client ID, the client secret, which apparently they should have when they register themselves with Microsoft. It also includes this one-time code that was given because I've given my consent. So this is the post request. What they get back is actually finally the access token. It's a JSON-like structure in the post response, so in one of the fields there is an access token, so it's a seemingly random-looking string of characters. Pretty long string, so I've removed some of the characters here, replaced with dots, so otherwise it would not have fit into the string. So this is the access token, which then later on they can use to actually get access to all my files or saved diagrams. And that's what they do. They include it into every request to the resource server, which in this case is OneDrive. And because that token is there, the resource server would then respond with the data. If the token is not correct, then the client will not receive my files, or will not be able to save files there as well. And this is all happening in the backend. I don't see it happening. I just stare at the blank screen, but usually that doesn't take long, so it just disappears here. And this is now in full control of the client developers, in the client application hands. So Draw.io decided that they didn't want to show me any kind of progress. They just showed me a white page, hoping that it never lasts for too long, but it can also be met in different ways, like a progress bar or something else. But once the process is successful and the Draw.io client have gotten data about myself from Microsoft, they now let me open my OneDrive and select the place where I want to keep the diagram. This is basically the whole point of the process. A pretty long process, if you ask me, and it's quite complicated, at least from the first perspective, because it includes 4 actors there: client, user, resource server, authorization server. But nevertheless, this is the flow that is recommended for most cases. In that situation, the access token never even appears in the browser. What the browser gets is single-use authorization code. And it's only used once, and then the access token is never in the browser, which is considered to be a more secure way because, well, if it's not in the browser, then there is no way how it can be leaked from the browser. So the attack surface is smaller. Then also the client, the browser doesn't know the password or the client secret in that case, because it's all handled by the backend, never sent to the browser. Then, of course, the whole point of that was that I've never given my Microsoft username and password to the client. That's the whole point of using OAuth at all. And so, yes, it is recommended in most cases, even for single-page applications. But this is not the only flow. There are a number of others, because we all know sometimes we don't do the recommended things. We do something that works. And sometimes it's not practical to use this one-time code, because maybe you don't have a backend at all. have front-end only application which uses, say, an Amazon Lambda or backend list or something, so you don't have backend for that. And you only have a JavaScript in the browser. So no point in having this separation at all. In that case, the whole one step of the process with the single-use access code can be omitted, and then the remaining steps altogether, they would be called implicit flow. Officially, it's not recommended unless you really have to go that path, but it is intended for third-party clients like Broadway or something like that. Another one that I can describe here is something called resource owner password credentials flow. It's a long name to say that, okay, you just enter your username and password. And it's only intended if the client developers and the resource server developers, they are basically the same company. Like in Microsoft case, if the client is OneDrive mobile application, it's okay for Microsoft if you enter your username and password to their own mobile app. In that case, the client is considered confidential, and in those situations, yeah, you should also just have the username and password, but it kind of defeats the whole purpose of OAuth flow. Nevertheless, this exists, it's documented, can be used, it's standard. Now, after looking at a number of flows with OAuth, you might think that, yeah, this whole thing is about giving access, it's about separating the concerns. We have third-party apps, we have the apps that have the data, and let's not share the credentials. And one might think that this is the primary use case for OAuth, and that wouldn't be correct, because I think the most widely used application of OAuth on the web is for social login. All those buttons like login with Facebook, Google, VK, Contacted. This is also using OAuth in most cases. And it kind of also defeats the purpose of building such a comprehensive and multi-step process if the whole point is just to identify the user. So we have authorization part handled by OAuth, and then authentication is kind of built on top of that and renders more or less useless or unnecessary complex the underlying layer. Though this is the way the web has evolved, so this is the situation we have to deal with right now. Anyways, when OAuth is used for authentication, just to figure out who is that user that came to the application, not really getting access to anything else than that. It's also standardized under the name OpenID Connect, and the whole point is that basically even without OpenID Connect, you can do that. You can authorize the user to access the user info endpoint. And so the only operation the user would be, the client would be authorized to do on behalf of the user is to request the user info, and that basically works as identification and authorization. But that would require two requests. First, you get the access token back, and then you make a GET request to get the user info. So what OpenID Connect does here is it allows you to specify special scope that the application requests, and then the ID token will come in the same response with the access token. That's the whole thing with OpenID Connect. So it's not much different from OAuth, but it's built on top of it, and it extends a little bit the standard, which allows to have one request list. That's OpenID. Now, a couple of words about what kind of problems can there be if you use OAuth. First, it's phishing. Now, this is an example which I saw a similar case myself, and I didn't notice anything particularly suspicious about this one. So I don't know if you can. If you think this looks somewhat fishy, anything that kind of catches your attention that will make you think a little bit more, if you see that kind of form. We have one very vigilant person and nobody else. Yeah, so this, as you can see, it's a pop-up, it's a new window, and it's kind of narrow, so you don't see full URL. It starts kind of okay, account.google.something, but if you make it wide enough, what you'll see, it's not the domain you probably expect there to be. And OAuth has absolutely nothing to prevent that. They could, of course, recommend that you don't open pop-ups, but it's up to application developers to do that, or not. In this case, it's a pop-up. Then the browser window might be an error, so you don't see the actual URL. And you will enter your username and password from Google somewhere you don't want to enter username and password from Google to. So that's one problem, potential. And I'm not aware of any good solutions there, so you have to be careful with that. And the other one is the excessive placement of permissions. Like in this example here, your client, if they want to request permissions to access Google Drive, they request rights to see, edit, create, delete all my files in Google Drive, view and manage my Google Doc documents, connect to external services, log location, and so on. And also that applies to my personal account and my organization files, which I have access to. So when clicking I confirm the access, be sure you really do trust the third party app. And that's another potential issue with OAuth. But that partly might depend on the authorization server. If they don't allow to request more granular access, that's what application developers will have to use, unless there is any other way. So those are the two kind of problems that I'm aware of with OAuth. If you want to learn more and finally read the RFC, please go ahead. There are some resources here that you might find useful. If you're a just user, be careful with the two things I mentioned. If you're building your own client using OAuth, please do select the right flow. Consider the authorization run flow. And if you're implementing the authorization server, then probably you still have to go and read the RFC, because authorization server is a bit more complicated thing. Now, thank you. This is time for questions. We are also